You are listening to the People Centric Podcast, where we talk through the toughest challenges that people face at work and give practical advice to fixing those challenges. Thanks for joining our movement to create workplaces that are happier, healthier, aligned, and empowered by putting people at the center of all that we do.
Hello, People Centric leaders. This is Philip Herzog on today's People Centric Podcast, and we are talking about leadership levels, and specifically accountability with executives. How to help your leaders be accountable and succeed. And if they're not, what's your role in it if you're their leader or one of their followers? So joining me are actually two great executives that I love to work with, and I actually work for them, but with them. Introducing the one and only Bethany Taff.
Oh, hello. I'm sorry I was a little late to push the unmute.
The power of the pause demonstrated by Bethany Taff, and
Yes.
also our co-founder and COO, Diana Royalty.
Hello. And once again, I sit here wondering if we've started this topic as an intervention to hold Diana accountable, and I feel attacked. So I'm already defensive.
None of that's true because you are one of the few people on our team with tenacity. Literally. So thanks.
Yeah, the only way that would be the case is if you orchestrated this intervention for yourself. So maybe that's what we really are here to do, and you orchestrated it.
I'm very crafty.
You're a crafty one. This one is, and maybe you listening too. You feel a little crafty. Maybe you feel like you're being talked about. This is a problem, and so the reason we're talking about this today is because every organization we work with has varying levels of leadership roles. Some teams are larger, some are smaller, and in them, there usually very early on becomes a conversation about a specific leader who may have trouble communicating, or they might not be executing to the level at which the rest of their team is. There might be challenges or gaps, and it comes to some specific leaders. So if you're thinking, is that my team and organization? Probably, if your organization has leaders. And so also great things can happen with these same leaders. They can change. Today's topic then is really looking at this problem to say, what happens when a leader system is not working as well? When the leader is not clear of their role, is not clear of expectations, or isn't being held accountable or holding others accountable, and what that can look like. So maybe just to open it up, I'd love to throw you both the question. What happens to a team or an organization when you see a leader that is really struggling on leading at the level of their role, at a leadership role? What happens to the team below them?
There's so many directions we could go with this. And I'm like thinking about so many different scenarios and people that we've worked with. And so we have said the disclaimer is like, if you think this is about you, you might be right or you might be wrong. Just because there's a lot of examples of this. We see this happen all of the time. And like, what is the impact of it if people, so your question is like, what's the impact on the team if the leader is not leading properly, like appropriately within their level, right? I think one thing that I was thinking about is sometimes, depending on how large the organization is, the team actually doesn't even totally know that it's their leader that's the problem. Do you know what I mean? So I think sometimes, like if it's like there is maybe a CEO or president, and then there's like an executive leader, and then their team directly under them, that team might think, you know what, my leader is really, really awesome, but it is our head honcho CEO president that's the problem. They just don't get us over here, which is usually a big like red flag, right? Is that if they are totally disconnected from the organization and not aligned with their top level leader, then that's usually a red flag to me that there is probably an issue with that direct leader. just to say, yeah, there's something that's causing misalignment from this level to the very top level. And so being able to address that. But they might think, oh no, my leader is really awesome. They let us do whatever we want to. They don't make any of the decisions. It's their boss that's telling them no to X, Y, and Z, right? And so I think that indicates just like a lack of ownership for that leader, where it's like, oh, you're not actually executing and taking ownership that you should be in an executive level over your team. So I think that was one example I was thinking of, is like, it might not impact your team in the way that you think it would, but it still impacts them.
Yeah. And when you asked the question, I immediately started thinking about not specific examples, but like overarching how any leader, people are looking to you for their cues. They're going to follow the direction that you give. Whether you're like a really passionate leader or kind of a subdued leader, it doesn't matter. Your team, everyone is watching those cues from you. So if you're like pretty laissez-faire and like don't need to start meetings on time, or, everyone can show up at 9:00 instead of 8:30, if that's the thing you're doing, your team is going to do it too. They're taking all of that from you. So I kind of look at it as like everyone's watching all the time. And so no matter what you're doing and no matter what you're putting out, your team is watching that.
That's a good point. I love the idea too that you're always being watched, which can be so powerfully positive, can also be really challenging. And I think our focus again today, what we're saying, these are some hangups that happen, some really big habits or system issues that occur, often maybe without feedback. And so how do you help a leader know or support success for the team when you're in that position? And Bethany, I loved your point. If you're working below a leader like this podcast can be really helpful for you. Maybe you work with a leader who's above you in the org chart, but it does impact your role and impacts what you do. So I think today's episode is really helpful to give you some tools to navigate and think of more of the leadership structure above and around you and how better to come and support that executive team that you're trying to work with. And if you're above on an org chart and you have leaders below you where there's challenges or frustrations, today could maybe also encourage you to think, oh, well, what do they see? If there's that disconnect from top to bottom, where does that fall? What's happening? Why is it there? So maybe my next question, before we jump into more of the juicy details of what accountability could look like, what would you all say if we went from executive level down to lead, to just give a really quick leadership 101 in general? What are the levels of executive leadership or hierarchy typically like in an org chart? What are the main focuses of those areas? What would you all say? What would you walk us through to kind of give us like a snapshot? What is general hierarchy for it at different decision levels in leadership?
Well, I can give the overview of that too, and then Diana, feel free to jump in on like the details of what those are. And I don't know, Philip, if that's where you kind of want us to go in terms of like what their focus is. But as far as just like what the levels are specifically, like typically you have your executive team and then maybe directors. Sometimes, depending on the size of your organization, the directors and the executives are the same, one and the same, right? But you might have like a C-suite, and then you might have a director level, and then you might have your manager or a supervisor or lead level like beneath that. So people have different titles, right, that they use for those, but that's generally those different levels. So executive, director, manager, supervisor, and or leads. And then again, depending on the size of the organization, directors and executives might be the same team, the same people. Then do you want us to go over like the focus for those different levels?
Yes. Yes, I love that idea. What's the focus or the emphasis of different leaders at those different levels you just mentioned?
Yeah, Diana, do you want to talk through those?
Yeah, sure, I can. Okay, so the leads and the supervisors, they're going to be really focused on like frontline stuff, frontline staff, day-to-day operations, all of the things that make the work happen. Managers are also doing that, but they're overseeing the leads and the supervisors, while they're starting to think about looking up at that next level, that director or executive level. And so I always sort of think of this as the big hierarchy chart. The supervisors and leads are going to focus right in the same level that they're in, that side to side. The managers are going to start looking up and down. They're going to look at the directors and the executives for their direction, but they're going to look down to make sure that it's getting executed. And then as you go the next level up, that director, that executive level, they're looking way more out than they are down. They're looking at the strategy, they're looking at trends, they're looking at finances, they're looking a way more out instead of down at the operations. So that's sort of where their focuses lie, but it doesn't mean that everyone's not kind of paying attention to all things. You know, everyone has that concept that there's much more, but that's where their focus should lie.
Yeah. And I think like executives and then maybe directors too, like it should be a fundamentally different job than a supervisor or manager. And I think that that's some of the issue that we see is like for people making that jump to figure out like what does leadership look like now at this level as an executive within an organization. It feels like anti everything they were supposed to be doing before. And I think maybe that's the hard part is because they're not focused on the day-to-day work. They're not necessarily focused on, the frontline employees or whatever your external, person is, like who you're serving, whether that's, patients or customers or another business, if it's B2B or whatever it may be. You're not maybe the one that's like directly interacting with those people too. So you feel a little bit more disconnected, but it's really a critical role because you're helping drive the strategy for, how everyone is going to do that work, and what we're prioritizing and all of those things. And so I think it's one of those things that it's just a hard transition for people within that role to be able to figure out like what should I be focused on and what does it actually mean to like be strategic and set visions and create goals, and then how do I help people execute on those goals and all of those things. It's a very different job, especially if you were technically trained in something. I think that's an area where we see lots of issues whenever people are taking jobs where like we work with a lot of healthcare organizations or manufacturing or whatever. And so I think if you have been trained as a nurse practitioner, but then you decided to like follow the path upward into like the business of the organization, the business of the hospital or the clinic or whatever, and you take leadership roles going up, or if you're an engineer within a manufacturing organization and that's how you were trained, was that specialty and that's the thing you really love, and then you grow into this executive position, it's so different. You're not doing the thing that you were trained technically in, and I think it's hard to kind of wrap your mind around some of that as you grow into those positions.
I love the synopsis you both gave of what this looks like, and I was thinking, Diana, when you're kind of saying, where do these leaders look? Or Bethany, to your point, how does communication flow? I think a lot of it, the leaders we see at the highest levels who are the most successful are really good at building strategy and then leading leaders who execute it. And so directors are a lot of those leaders who are that in between operationalizing strategy with the teams below them. And to your point, Bethany, when you're highly skilled, it can be really hard to step away and become more influential and less technical in your application, which is why, again, I think the leaders who succeed the best are just really good at interpreting at a high level, basically, whether it's skillful details going up to the top to then just say, hey, this is the big ticket item and why it matters for the executive team and what we should do next. Or from the top down, okay, here's a really big strategy. Team below, how can I help you implement this as needed and troubleshoot, but you're going to go do it with your teams and like make it happen in the real life for the front end, whether that's manufacturing, small business, healthcare. And so with that, I'm curious, maybe this is partly why it's so hard sometimes for executives to, first of all, even know if they're being effective or not, because it can be really hard as a leader leading teams to have a clear end result at the end of the day. I think a lot of leaders I meet with who are the most frustrated, sometimes the ones that people would point at and say, they're not executing at the highest level. And they might say, I know I'm not executing incredibly well, but it's really hard to know what that looks like. So I'm curious, on the flip side of how do we know when this is working really well? How do you know when a leader has systems in place that are working well? How do you know if someone is an effective director or executive?
Ooh, that's a tough one for me to think. I always think about the bad stuff, Philip. I always think about things that are going wrong. So it's funny to flip that. I tend to always think in terms of our 5 systems, like our 5 business need systems. And those are strategy, communication, execution, leadership, and people. And so I kind of think about when things are going really well and leaders are leading at the top of their practice. I always think that everyone knows what they're doing and what winning looks like. Everyone gets the information that they need. So the knowing where you're going and what you're doing and what winning looks like, that's strategy. And then the getting the information that you need when you need it to do your job really well, that's communication. Having the right systems and processes and procedures in place that aren't breaking down, that aren't flubbing handoffs, that aren't, causing the customer a bunch of strife. That's execution. Getting feedback at a regular cadence and understanding what that looks like for you, that's leadership. That's the accountability and development part of leadership. And then feeling good about going to work most days. I'm not saying every day, but that's a good people system. So when it's really working, all of those things are kind of running well, right? It's not perfect every day, but those things are running well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that's good. And I would add something that we kind of talked about before that too is also just that they're taking ownership over their role and the things that are, within their realm of responsibility, right? So, and not passing things off easily or kind of passing the buck upwards to say, well, that's just what our CEO wants to do. That's what they said, or I'm not going to do that because it's, XYZ. But I think that's just another sign that it's they just take a lot of ownership over their role and are willing to say, you know what, maybe I didn't make that decision, but here's what we're going to do with it. Or, hey team, we got to figure this out because this is the direction that we're going, or whatever it may be, right?
I love that. I think that's a great way to pivot to our final section of today's podcast, which is then to help hold those leaders accountable. Or how do you help someone, whether they really are leaning into ownership or not? What would you all say? What are some maybe 2 or 3 tips or tricks that you'd recommend people to have if you're trying to help those folks above you be accountable?
So it's tricky, right? I think it's really hard, especially in organizations where you aren't around your leader every day, all day, right? I think we talk about people centric a lot, and it's not super hard to hold me or Dawn accountable, right? You see us every day, all day. But when you do have more of that separation, and maybe you see this person twice a week or 3 times a week, and there's a lot to cover in every type of meeting, I think it's difficult. And I also think there's always that power dynamic. And so there's always this level of, how do I maintain professionalism? How do I be respectful? How do I honor the position that they've been promoted to while also still getting what I need and sharing my expertise, so that everything runs really smoothly? Because I think all of those things interact together. So the first thing I would say is to give your boss the benefit of the doubt, right? There's a lot going on. There's a lot happening. He's got people talking from both directions and side to side. So give them the benefit of the doubt, assume good intent for the most part, and then ask good questions when you get there. Hey, I know you said you were going to do this, or we had discussed this. I haven't seen anything yet. Where are we at on it? Instead of, you didn't do this. Just ask where we're at on it. I don't know. I think, asking some good questions first is probably where I would start.
Yeah, we were talking about this internally of just ways that our team has done it. And I do think that to Diana's point, we're a small team and we have, we built some really strong relationships. So we think we trust each other and are able to set some of the standards. But I mean, to that point of being able to ask questions, we were just in a meeting where we were having a conversation and we were all wondering like, what's the follow-up going to be? And so, one member of our team, Ashley, she was really good to say like, okay, well, when do we need to meet next? And do you want me to schedule that meeting? And do we have an idea of what we need to come prepared and ready to talk about in that meeting? And is there any other follow-ups that I need, I can set for the team or, different things like that. And I think those are an example of some really good questions that you can ask. And knowing that, like, are you willing to step in and say, hey, I can help with some of this stuff, to say, instead of just waiting for your boss to say, I'll schedule that follow-up, or I will do this and that. And I know you probably wish that your boss would do that, but to see previous comments that they do have a lot of things going on. And so I think the more regularly you do come and ask some of these questions for follow-up, I think sometimes, people will start to recognize it and anticipate that, hey, I know Philip is going to ask this question, so I'm going to go ahead and try to answer this next time so that he doesn't have to ask the question, right? And that just helps, that sort of helps train them. And I don't mean that in like a derogatory way, but like it sort of helps train leaders as well of like what their team needs from them to create some accountability for themselves too. So sometimes they just are not thinking about it in that way, and they need a little bit of like healthy pressure put on them, even from their team.
I love the way you just said that, Bethany. It's sort of like everyone wants to know what the expectation is of them. And if you haven't shared what you expect from your leader, maybe you should share that. Like, and I love it when people come to me and are like, hey, I was expecting this and I got this. We got cross. We got sideways, right? That's great. I want to know the expectation you have of me so that I can go and do that next time. And I think a lot of people are afraid to share the expectation with their leader. And I love the way you just put that.
That was well said. I think one of the things we talked about as a team before this as well is that because we're all people, whether you are the CEO of the world's largest company or you are a like a grocery store clerk stocking those beautiful shelves, we're all people. So not only do we, do a lot of things similar, but I think we also respond to really simple things like expectations. We all want to know if we're winning and doing a good job. And we want the people around us to know if they're winning and doing a great job too. And so 3 questions we say are helpful for people of any level is the do more, do less, or keep the same. And so one thing that we've encouraged many leaders to do, a lot of my coachings become this way. I'll ask a leader if they don't know what their goals are. I'll just say, well, what do you want to keep doing in your job that you like what you do? It feels good. It feels right. What do you want to do more of? Where do you want to grow? What challenges you? What's that next corner that you really are a little scared and nervous to take? What do you want to do less of? What's killing you? What's wasting your time? What's something that you can pass on to someone else? And you can ask that up. You can ask that down. What I love too, we talked about this idea maybe a little bit, the 3 teams. If I define a great executive, it is certainly someone that has those systems. It's not necessarily someone with an executive presence. It doesn't mean you have to wear a blazer. Maybe you don't always match your belt and your shoes. Maybe your business etiquette could even grow a little bit, but someone who can use systems and apply influence to coalesce around goals as a team. I think that's really what makes an effective leader. And so our rapid fire round out, what is one final takeaway or a final encouragement you would have for someone who's looking to grow into a leadership role or better help a challenging leader that's above them on the org chart?
I think Bethany and I both we're like, oh man, there's so many things. It is, and I think it's really difficult, right? It's hard to go to a leader and be like, you aren't doing what you said you would do. And so I don't know, Bethany, what do you think?
Well, the first question was, can you reframe? Can you say the question again? The first question you.
What would be encouragement you would give to someone who wants to grow in their leadership role?
Okay.
Or second, what is some advice you'd give someone, just some simple, basic advice for someone who may be struggling with a leader above them who is difficult to work with, who maybe doesn't always take accountability or ownership. So you're trying to help a difficult leader above you.
Oh, well, so I have an answer for the second one. Well, I was just thinking about like, I think
Go.
one thing that you can do is just kind of ask them what it's like to be them. So I heard that somewhere recently where I was like, oh, I love that question. And I even did this like with my kids recently where I was just like, tell me what it's like to be you. And just to get inside of their head a little bit, because it's a different question than saying, tell me what you're responsible for in your role. Help me understand what your job is. It's a different kind of question. And I think it gives you like the reality of what that position looks like, at least for that person, combined with all of their unique experiences and all of the personal things that, make them an individual, right? But I think that's one interesting way to learn about who they are and the challenges that they're facing and the questions that they're trying to answer and all the things that they're trying to prioritize. So I think that's maybe one way to do it. And if you have a leader where you can, I think there's probably a moment where you can say, okay, that's helpful. I just want to know more about you. And you can get a little bit of compassion for the leader in that way. But then I think it can help open up a conversation to be able to say, and like, is that what this role is? Like, is that what this role looks like? Or are there things that you wish you could be working on or focusing on that you're not able to right now? And being able to ask some questions like that. But I think it's being able to kind of like take that empathetic approach first and then being able to ask some of those second questions. And you're not telling them to do anything different at that moment. I think you're just trying to understand what that role looks like, at least within your organization or for this person specifically.
Yeah, you touched on one of my other favorite questions, and it's, if you were me, what would you want me to do? Right? Like, leader, put yourself back in the position of me and tell me how you would want me to handle it. And sometimes that just shows the other person like, oh, I actually do need to communicate better, or I do need to tell you more, or I do need to whatever. Or conversely, it might be like, oh, I would expect you to go do this thing that they never told you they had that expectation. So I think it opens up a really good conversation if you can do both of those things. If you can say, tell me what it's like to be you, and then you also think about what it's like to be me. And how do we make those two things work really well together?
That is such a powerful question. I love that. You're kind of talking about the difference between maybe some implicit understandings people have versus explicit. So if it's implicit, a leader might say, well, I would assume that they would know, or I feel like my aura should communicate this, as opposed to, no, what if you were me, would you want me to do? One final add I might put in there: if you hear a leader who's overwhelmed, they might use the word I a lot. I got to do this, and then I have to do this. And so one great question to Bethany's point is, well, how can I help you? If you know what life is like, how can I help you? Or know that we can help you? Because a leader, especially the higher up you go, if a leader at a high level uses the word I all the time, that's someone who may not be relying on their team or tapping into their team. So why not? That would be a question to explore. So much more. We are always excited and thankful for the real life stories. We are daytime consultants. We just podcast occasionally. But if you have more real world examples, questions, challenges, bring them to us. You can contact us listening on the outro. And until next time, lead well.
Thank you for listening to the People Centric Podcast. We are so grateful for you joining us every week. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. Also, feel free to share on your social media with everyone that you know. It really does help us. If you would like to contact us, I have put our information in the show notes. Please reach out anytime. We love hearing from you. We will be back next week with a new topic. Until then, be well and lead